Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Once again, as we welcome our listeners, our viewers on the various platforms of Salam Media. It is Wednesday night with myself, Inayat Wadi, part two of tonight's discussion. And this was Iran being the major talking point in the ceasefire that has been announced, but the plight of Al-Aqsa still remains. And this evening, we joined by Samuel Monair, who is a Palestinian theologian from Jerusalem. He holds degrees from Durham University, Exeter University, works as an advocacy and access officer for a humanitarian organization that works in Gaza and the West Bank. And he recently co-authored with his brother John the book entitled The Cross and the Olive Tree, Cultivating Palestinian Theology Amid Gaza. My other two guests obviously need no introduction on Salam Media. We've got Dr. Ismail Adam Patel. He is he's a founder and chair of Friends of Aqsa, and Maulana Ibrahim Musa, Palestinian Information Network. As we welcome our guests, to all of you, Samuel, Dr. Ismail Patel, Maulana Ibrahim Musa, Assalamu alaikum, and welcome to this evening's broadcast. Yes, Samuel, I'd actually like to begin with you. And obviously, the major talking point, as I mentioned in my introduction, has been about Iran and the ceasefire, but also of major concern has been the closure of Al-Aqsa, and not only the closure of Al-Aqsa as well. We've seen just so much religious repression that has been taking place in Jerusalem and the Holy Land.
Exactly. I think the closure of Al-Aqsa, or the closure to Palestinians, more precisely, because the settlers and Israelis raid Al-Aqsa on a weekly basis, is a reminder that although there's a supposed ceasefire in the region, the situation for Palestinians is still very dire. As a Palestinian Christian as well, coming up to celebrate Easter, from the Eastern tradition, our churches are also closed, and it's uncertain how we are going to celebrate and have freedom of worship during these times. Having said that, I think there are key issues to look at the ceasefire, to be cautious about what the ceasefire means, where power lies, and what that may entail to Palestine. What I think is important, though, with Al-Aqsa is a symbol of Palestine in general. So with the closure of Al-Aqsa is more of a symbol that the occupation and the settler colonialism that we are facing hasn't ceased.
Certainly, Samuel. And also, I think, Dr. Ismail, we've had this discussion over and over again, and I know, major concerns on your part as well. I've actually been following developments since the closure of Masjid Al-Aqsa, which is obviously running close to 40 days already, as we speak right now as well. And just as friends of Al-Aqsa, the key issue here is the strategic, as Samuel speaks about. He speaks about the symbolic and the strategic importance of Aqsa, and also in the current geopolitical discourse and the conflict that is taking place, or that has been taking place, and the attacks on Iran.
Absolutely. I mean, just to expand on what Samuel has already mentioned, that one, in the fact that Al-Aqsa is not only a symbol for Palestinian Muslims, but also the Christians. It's a symbol for Palestinians overall. But that symbolism also extends beyond the border of Palestine, and it is a symbol for Muslims globally. And what Israel is doing is not only exercising its colonialist narrative and its approach to the Palestinian territories, but it's also saying to the world community, in particular to the Muslims, that we do not care about you, and we have a right to take over your symbols and your blessed sites. And I think Muslims need to understand that this is not about geography alone. This goes to the heart of what Muslims believe in, and it is being violated by Israel. And therefore, we need to join hands globally and understand the vicious nature of Israel's intention of what it is doing to Masjid Al-Aqsa. Just to elaborate on the fact that, as you mentioned rightly, that it has been closed for 40 days, but those 40 days includes most of Ramadan, including Eid Salah, and now beyond that Eid Salah as well. And this has been definitely the longest time Al-Aqsa has been closed on such a precious days for Muslims since the days of the Crusades. And I think that is telling a lot.
Well, it certainly is telling a lot. And I know, Maulana Ibrahim Musa, you've had a lot to say. I've seen the video clip of yours that have done the rounds as well with regards to the closure. And this is the reason why we are having this discussion. We call it Ceasefire in Iran, but Al-Aqsa still remains closed as well. Just some of your thoughts, Maulana Ibrahim?
Yeah, indeed. I think in everything that is occurring, what we are trying to assert, and I think what our other respected colleagues are trying to assert in a global audience. We've got a call from Dr. Mustafa Abu Sway, also representing the Islamic Awqaf out in Jerusalem, as reported just in the past day or two, saying do not mess with the status quo at Al-Aqsa. And therefore, while there is much focus at this moment in time on the fine detail and already the very shaky nature of the ceasefire that has been entered into in Iran, and so much global diplomacy is being poured into obviously diffusing that particular conflict, and also trying to deal with the fallout of its economic ramifications around the world. Why are decision makers not placing the same premium on Masjid al-Aqsa and the religious sites in Jerusalem, noting the potential, the much greater potential these have to, spark great religious war around the world, to spark much more instability around the world? It's almost a no-brainer that we are putting economic interests and all other kind of diplomatic interests over something that is dear and ignites much more passion and emotion to believers all over the world, which is the case of the holy sites, Masjid al-Aqsa and the holy sepulchre around the world. And it still seems in the discourse and the diplomacy that's taking place that is not being afforded sufficient weight, or the gravity of the situation is not being realized.
Yes, and also I think, Samuel, just following up from what Maulana Ibrahim Musa is saying, and in terms of the discourse, the political discourse, but how religion is being used. Now, we've obviously just come through two critical periods, one being the month of Ramadan for Muslims, the other Easter as well. And when one talks about the political discourse in the Zionist, the greater Zionist project as well, as far as religion is concerned. And this is absolutely important and critical to understand that when one looks at even Donald Trump, for example, even when one looks at Pete Hegseth, when we look at some of the statements that they made recently, and particularly over Easter as well, and making reference to religion, and clearly there is a disconnect in what they are saying versus what is actually taking place with regard to Aqsa, and also in terms of Muslims and Christians, both in Jerusalem and in Palestine in general.
Precisely. I think theology and religion is so embedded within our logic that we are not even realizing the genealogy of the speeches and the thinking and the outlooks that we have towards Palestine, but more broadly, the Mashraq and the global South. So when you hear Donald Trump and other Western Christians spewing disregard to Al-Aqsa and the Christians of Western Asia, this is actually coming from a genealogy from the Crusader period. This was mentioned before. And the certain logics that we are seeing that have been passed down over centuries are now being invoked. And I think that's why places like Al-Aqsa and the Church of Resurrection, and in general religion and theology, are very important lenses in the way we understand the reality around us and the way we can also bring liberation. a lot of times people are focusing on what we're looking at, but not necessarily what we're looking with. And I think what is important is to analyze where are people and what lenses are people looking with, not only at what people are looking at. And in that case, Al-Aqsa is so important, and theology and religion is a crucial lens into either bringing peace and liberation to this geography, or war, destruction, and displacement.
Yes, Dr. Ismail, when we talk about diplomatic positioning, and even with the ceasefire that has been announced now, we know there are a number of issues, and the 10-point plan that we're talking about, the Strait of Hormuz, featured very, very prominently because it is of strategic importance to the world, to the global economy, and the geography and where it is situated, how it actually impacts on an entire world. But together with the Strait of Hormuz, that was closed, Al-Aqsa was closed. And when we talk about diplomatic positioning, the thing is the omission, and we're not seeing that message come through very, very strongly, because it is as a result of the attack on Iran that we've seen Masjid al-Aqsa being closed simultaneously.
Look, the messaging, I suppose there's double messaging, especially in Britain. I can only speak about Britain. I can't speak for South Africa and what's happening on the ground on Palestine. But when the two clergies were refused entry in the Church of Holy Sepulchre, the British Prime Minister immediately made a condemnation and appealed to the Israelis to allow them back in. And of course, that was followed by many other leaders around the European capitals as well. And Israel, the Netanyahu, if we believe him, he made a call that they should be allowed in. What we're saying here is that was, if you like, the optics, the symbolism of trying to make the world believe that Israel somehow allows people of faith to go into the church. But there's something very serious about underlying message. One, of course, the occupation of all Palestinians, irrespective of whether they're Christians, Muslim, or people of no faith, still continues. But here was also a prioritization from the Western capitals of whose faith and whose prayers are more important. And I think we have to put that into the context of what Samuel mentioned, is how they're looking at this issue with. It is not only looking through the lens of faith. They're using the Eurocentric narrative to look at the faith in respect of Palestine. And therefore, the Palestinian Christians as well become dispensable in this, because faith itself becomes, or Christianity in particular, becomes a European-centric or Eurocentric idea and a civilization, not a global civilization. It becomes a European civilization. And anybody who is attached to that are almost secondary, like the Palestinians or the African Christians or the Asian Christians. They become redundant. And I think there's something very serious that is, a narrative that is emerging at the moment in the West, of both continuing the occupation and trying to provide symbolism to show that they do care about Christians. But in effect, with little, it's just an idea of, if you like, a window dressing and a makeup while the occupation continues. Just want to expand on this, if you allow me, of what we've also seen, why it's so dangerous. Just today, the settler groups appealed to the High Court of Israel to see whether they could be allowed to go into Masjid al-Aqsa. And the High Court of Israel refused. Some people in the social media said, look how great this was, and it was a good thing it didn't allow the settlers to move into Al-Aqsa. For me, I think that's a very dangerous precedent, because here now we have the Israeli High Court determining who is allowed to go in and not to go into the masjid. This should be the responsibility of the Awqaf, not the Israeli High Court. It is a status quo dictates that it is the responsibility and the duty of the Muslim Awqaf in Palestine that should be responsible for it. And that, according to this ruling, has been taken away from us. And therefore, I think we're really going down a very dangerous path towards Israel, as I mentioned right at the beginning of the closure in 28th of February, that what Israel is trying to do is take over the administrative control of Masjid al-Aqsa and then move even further ahead and take over the total control of it.
Yes. Maulana Ibrahim, what's also critical is while these attacks were taking place on Iran, and when one looks at, and I know Dr. Ismail speaks about, how this is received in the West, but also in terms of the Persian Gulf region, where many of these countries that were affected by the attacks on American bases, and they would all seem to be concerned about how it's impacting on themselves, on their countries, the movement of gas, from Qatar through the Strait of Hormuz as well. But they were all aware that Masjid al-Aqsa was closed. And to the extent that, impotent in taking a standpoint, but also at the same time, I even heard one of the Jordanian members of parliament making an appeal to the Pope to appeal to the Israeli entity and the regime to open Al-Aqsa. Now, I mean, what do you make of this? Because again, is Aqsa really important? Is it an area of focus for these Persian Gulf countries as well? I know some of them made a few noises, they made a few statements of expressing their concern, but we don't see that that zeal and the enthusiasm, as we've seen how they've been impacted on a local level, economically and in other ways.
I think there's a few ways of approaching this particular question, Inayat. And firstly, the Jordanian MP that you referenced, his particular sentiment, I think, is more out of sarcasm and commenting on the lack of leadership that's not to be found from the Muslim authorities and those who are invested with leadership in the Muslim world. Not only the Muslim states. Obviously, this is not a moment to settle internal scores or enter into internal recriminations. But there are many questions to be asked of, and I'm not saying this as an outsider or somebody standing very far away from the issue. Al-Aqsa is an issue of every believer. Al-Aqsa is felt as dearly as it is to me in South Africa, as a South African Muslim, as it is, as the holy sites are precious to those who have religious affiliations to these sites from any other part of the world. But Palestinians themselves in Al-Quds and Palestinians who are connected to the issue have questioned whether there's been a forthright enough stance from the Jordanian authorities, from the Awqaf board, who would officially have the custodianship in their hands. And obviously there are statements from various parties to say that the Jordanians do have our back. They are not going to allow the status quo to be tattered. We are not going to be allow separate prayer times at Masjid al-Aqsa. That is kind of reassuring, but it ignores a steady build-up. It's not as if the events since the start of the aggression on Iran mark the onset of the tearing up of the status quo. This has been a steady process over more than a decade, if not 2 decades, where deliberate steps have been taken to tear up incrementally the status quo at Masjid al-Aqsa. And for example, there are many Awqaf guards, for instance, who have not, have been banned by the Israelis, who have been arrested by the Israelis. And there's very often a lament that the Awqaf or the Jordanian authorities have not stood up forthrightly to be able to assist these particular parties. But now this opens up a broader issue in my assessment, which is, as you've described, on the one hand, the Gulf states who have shown perhaps some teeth to be able to move away from a pacifist stance during this particular war, when they felt that their national sovereignty has been eroded, has come under threat from the Iranian attacks, and talking about invoking defense charters, defense kind of mechanisms, joint mechanisms to be able to defend their territory. And we also see that they have then moved away from what one traditionally might have associated them with in this particular stance. Likewise, on the other hand, one has Iran, as you have asked earlier, in this circumstance of the ceasefire. Iran, seemingly did not bring this up or did not elevate this issue to be among its 10 points. And I think one way of looking at this is that this is a matter of interests before ideology. And perhaps sometimes we have exaggerated in describing Iran's role negatively or positively, and purely framing its actions within the realm of a moral savior or somebody who's standing up for the resistance. Those elements exist, but Iran's also an ambitious regional state, and it has its own calculations and priorities. And likewise, the stance of all the regional states is based on national interests, calculations, and priorities. What we are saying here is, or what I'm saying here is, if we are looking at this issue piecemeal and we fail to recognize the broader aspirations of the current clique who are in control of policy in the Israeli state, as per their own statements, and we only consider regional, our own calculations, our own regional ambitions, we are falling very, very short of the moment, which demands to look at regional threats as well as ummatic threats.
Yes, Malana, I think you make a very, very powerful and a profound statement there. But Samuel, just getting back to you. And I think, Samuel, it's ironic that when we look at Jerusalem and the status of Jerusalem, and it was during Trump's first term of office where he unilaterally declared Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. And now during the second term, we see this closure, as Dr. Ismail says, that, after I don't know how long, we've seen the closure of Aqsa for such a period of time. And again, in the context of what we are discussing, the omission of Al-Aqsa from the 10-point plan as well, in terms of global advocacy, what does this mean? And globally, what should we be thinking about? What should we be actually doing about it?
I think, since October 7th and the genocide in Gaza and continuing now to the current situation with Iran, there's basically been an unveiling of the powers and the interests and the priorities of different movements and in different states. And with this unveiling, where we see the settler colonial states of the West standing behind Israel, but also really the role of the GCC countries who've also maintained the Western hegemony around the world, we see this unveiling as a moment of clarity and a moment of opportunity as well for us to be more accurate in our advocacy. I think the task that we have is to really galvanize the popular support of Palestine and the symbolism that Palestine has globally that extends beyond the river to the sea, but globally to all injustices that countries and systems of oppression have, to mobilize and galvanize real effort and real power to create effective change. And I really think that Palestine is actually a key. It's a key because, as I mentioned, Palestine is a symbol, and the world's colonial history is concentrated in Palestine and in Jerusalem specifically. And we see that the attack by Hamas to Tufan al-Aqsa, the Al-Aqsa flood, was actually a response to the Abraham Accords that Trump did with many of Saudi Arabia and Israel and other GCC countries. And actually, that was an unveiling to see that Jerusalem is an important place to transform how we may imagine liberation and how we can achieve it. And I think when it comes to advocacy, in this unveiling moment, it's also an unveiling towards our solidarity and resistance movement, that we need to reassess our strategies, our targets, our way of performing and acting, because frankly, the genocide in Gaza, the bombardment today of Lebanon and Beirut, really shows that we have failed in many areas and we have shortcomings. So really, we also need to assess our own shortcomings within our efforts to bring liberation and peace to humanity. And I think really the key here is really exposing the systems, the countries that have been either complicit or supportive of the genocide of the Palestinian people and of other people around the world, the closure of Al-Aqsa, and the hypocrisy and the impotence that countries have with regards to bringing that change.
Yes. Dr. Ismail, throughout these last 40 days or so with the attack on Iran, there's been a lot of talk about, again, the Greater Israeli Project. And in the context of Greater Israel Project and looking at Aqsa and the status of Aqsa, and perhaps, if we could just spend a few minutes, looking at how this actually fits in with the Greater Israeli Project.
Look, the Great Israel Project really is a Zionist project, is a colonialist project, and it has got very little to do with Judaism and the faith of Jews. However, the Zionists have hijacked aspect of Judaic faith, or instill within the Judaic faith certain Zionist ideology, to be more appropriate. And part of that is to create a Greater Israel that is partly based on myth and second on fantasy. That this Greater Israel seems to even extend beyond any borders that anybody could have imagined Israel to have existed 3,000 years ago. I mean, in those days, you used to have city-states. You never had sort of states geographical size that we have today. So the idea that, from the river, from the Mediterranean to the Euphrates should all be Israel is really, it's all challenged historically. But that's by and by. The reality still remains that there are literally hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of Zionists who are buying into this, and they want to bring that aspiration. But of course, the Greater Israel's central meaning is not fulfilled unless Jerusalem is its capital. And that is also not fulfilled until they build the temple on the site of Masjid al-Aqsa. And therefore, you can see how Al-Aqsa and the precincts of Al-Aqsa are so central towards the Zionist aspiration of creating that Greater Israel, because it becomes the epicenter of their vision. And therefore, I think we have to be very careful in this day and age, as Samuel has very well mentioned, that we have a world order now that has created instruments like the United Nations, ICC, ICJ, all the other instruments that are supposed to be bringing about peace. They were then created by the West themselves, the colonialist powers themselves, to ensure that they can continue to rule the world in what we call the post-colonialist order, and continue with its colonialism in a different format. And here Israel, I think, plays a pivotal role for them as well to ensure that that continues. And that has been shown to us over the last 3 years that none of those instruments were able to help the people in Gaza against the genocide that was visited. Neither is it helping the Iranians nor the Lebanese people at this day and age. So the world society, the civil society, I think, needs to rise up, challenge its respective governments from wherever they are, and bring them to account, either through democratic means or through legal means. I think the civil society, particularly in Britain, is very, very strong, and we are doing as much as we can. And I hope that we can transport some of this, if you like, enthusiasm, the solidarity, the equity with which we want the global order to be running around the world, so that we have some semblance of peace and justice as much as we can. Because at the moment, the few countries around the world, in particularly headed by United States of America, and the war itself being executed by Israel, is running havoc on people. I mean, we've just had literally dozens of people killed today by Israel in the heart of Beirut. I mean, if this was happening to any other people around the world, we'd have 24/7 coverage about this. But yet, it's being done by the Israelis, so the victims become invisible and their suffering becomes insignificant, and almost, it's a perverse way, especially the media in Europe and in Britain is almost justifying what Israel is doing. So we need to change that narrative, and we need to ensure that people understand the global order that we're living under first, and also Israel's aspiration when they talk about the greater Israel. What does that mean for ordinary human beings in the region? What does it mean for Jerusalem? What does it mean for, including the Church of Holy Sepulchre, and in particularly Masjid al-Aqsa?
Yes, Dr. Ismail. And also, Maulana Ibrahim, perverse in every way. I'm not too sure how to describe it. Evil personified in each and every way, where one sees that even now over the Easter weekend, religious rhetoric being repeated, that comment or that tweet from Donald Trump, praise be to Allah. And I know that obviously created quite a reaction as well. And what do you make of this? And I'd just like to come back to this issue of religious rhetoric being repeated over and over again in the name of Christianity.
So it speaks from my perspective, to the fact that a theme that most of our guests have pointed out this evening, which is, from a Muslim point of view, you have, Al-Aqsa, this deep wound at Masjid al-Aqsa, and you have the deep wound at the Church of Holy Sepulchre. Nobody's, dividing these particular communities, but it's almost as if the wound at Masjid al-Aqsa is something that is papered over by the world community, and the protestations from around the world do not merit any kind of movement from the policy makers within Israel. Likewise, we see, just as Brother or Dr. Ismail had mentioned, the fact that if the kind of atrocities that we saw today in Lebanon occurring in any other part of the world, it would have provoked major upheavals. But it's just Lebanon. It's just another Arab state. It's just another massacre that can occur. And this coming on the back of the wholesale massacre and genocide in the Gaza. So this speaks to the effect of dehumanization and the effect of the cheapening of everything that is associated with Arab third world life, as well as the way that anybody, politicians in the West and the Israeli cabal, can get away with anything as long as they flash a Muslim card in front of it. And I think this now requires us to, as we've spoken about activism, very often, spaces of solidarity, sometimes actively try to shut out faith and say, would say that under the guise of saying that, we don't want to make this seem like it is a religious conflict, ask people not to bring their faith into these spaces. But faith needs to play a very important role in these spaces to calibrate our idea of justice and a very balanced idea of justice. So it's not, like some of the previous comments reference, that we all do look, as much as people try to divorce religion from the topic, a lot of our rhetoric, a lot of what we say is grounded in our biases, is grounded in the way we've been conditioned, the way we believe. So the idea is not to shun that, but the idea is to hone that special power that we find within faith to be able to guide our activism, and to also then deal with this issue whereby Muslim life, third world life, Arab life, has been trivialized and has, lost its value. We need to bring back value to these sacred spaces. We need to bring back value to the dignity of a human being. And I'm positing, obviously, as again our guests have mentioned, Jerusalem, the power of symbolism is critical here. And in our activism, then Masjid al-Aqsa should take that center point. This was the gathering point of the messengers. And, some of the scholarly discourses in Islam mention that this was the place where the Almighty had sent out so many messengers to humanity. And therefore, it's only appropriate, as we know, this is Arbul Mahshari wal Manshar. This is the place where all of humanity will be gathering for the resurrection, will be gathering for Qiyamah. And they explain that this is on the basis of that the Almighty sent so many messages out for the guidance of humanity from here. And therefore, it's only appropriate that all of humanity once again gathers in Jerusalem. So ignoring the symbol, takes out the potency of our struggle, takes out a compass for the focus of our energies in the struggle. And also from a religious perspective, this is the place of barakah. This is the place of blessing. So using this as our compass and to draw strength will also infuse blessing into, a kind of barakah and a kind of prosperity into the efforts that we make for the cause.
Yes, Maulana. But Samuel, also, when Maulana Ibrahim speaks about the power of symbolism, and this Zionist regime has recognized Aqsa, as a symbol of power. And this is the reason why, when you have people like Ben Gabir, for example, we've seen how many incursions have actually been made in Aqsa over a period of time as well. And to a large extent, it's been insulting in more ways than one. And also with the legislation that was actually passed, the death penalty legislation that was passed, when one sees the video footage coming through in celebrating mood, drinking to it. And so when you are dealing with people like Ben Kabir, for example, and again, looking at activist people right across the entire world who have now seen the dark side of people like Ben Gavir, what their ambitions are, what they are capable of actually doing as well. How does one actually, respond to this? And more importantly, from an activism perspective, and also in terms of ensuring that the pressure remains as far as not only the liberation of Al-Aqsa, but also the liberation of Palestine, because we've seen what is also featured now is immediately when the ceasefire deal with Iran was announced, the talk of the board of peace is now starting to surface as well.
Living in Jerusalem on a daily basis, I see settlers carrying the flag of the Third Temple. And, it's very hard to react to such evil and such ugliness. You mentioned the death penalty, which is a huge, huge worrying development and blow to the Palestinian prisoner movement, which is one of the most unifying movements for the Palestinian cause and for the Palestinian people. It's very difficult. It's very difficult to respond. And you always feel as though you're reacting and you're on the defensive when you're responding to such ugliness. But I really think that the key lens for our advocacy and activist spaces is to understand that the likes of Ben Gvir and the flags that I see in Jerusalem carrying the Third Temple, which basically means the destruction of Al-Aqsa, is part of a system. And that system, if I am going to maybe reflect on it from a Christian theological perspective, is a sinful system. It's a system that distorts what God has created, and where it distorts the relationship between human to human and human to the land. And therefore, if that system is a system of sinfulness, then we ought to be in revolution against it. I think really what is important when I mention that is when we treat these phenomenons, when we look at the death penalty, when we look at Ben Gvir going and raiding Al-Aqsa and desecrating the site, we need to see this within a systematic lens, not only as an individual who is being violent and abhorrent. That's the first point. The second point, I think, is if we are in this constant reality of colonialism and violence, it's very easy to become reactive. It's very easy to be always on the defensive. And I think it's our job to engage internally, to imagine internally together, and to start thinking about the future, a decolonized future, where we are able not only to always react to our oppressor, but also to really plan, strategize, and act for a future that is liberated, for a future where Al-Aqsa is open and is safe for worshippers to go. And I think once when we start doing that, we understand that the layers of violence and of colonialism and of racism that we encounter is actually generational. Mentioned by Dr. Ismail is that, the logic that we're seeing is present from the Crusaders and the Christian Zionist and the Zionist rhetoric is coming from a long genealogy of Western Christianity that holds so much of the systems and the imaginations of the people of the world. And I think once we encounter and really deconstruct these histories and these logics and these actions within its context, then we actually understand that really power lies not only within ourselves, but within the alliances that we can establish with people who are in the global south. And I think that's why this conversation is important, and what Salam Media is doing is important, is the connection and the dialogue that we can have as global south and oppressed people really will be a key to moving forward and absorbing and reacting appropriately and dismantling the systems that allow Ben Gvir to pass the law of the death penalty, or the settlers that I see on a daily basis carrying the flags of the Third Temple. This is really, really, I think, important as we move forward in our faith and also within our advocacy.
Yes. Dr. Ismail, I've just got a message actually that's come through from one of my colleagues at Salam Media, and perhaps Samuel, you can also verify, where he says, Salams, I picked this up on another group. Perhaps you can raise this question. Not sure if this is true or fake news. According to an employee of the Islamic Waqf, a meeting is currently underway between the Waqf and the Israeli police to arrange the reopening of Al-Aqsa Mosque. Some reports indicate that the mosque will reopen tomorrow, Thursday at dawn. Can this be verified?
For me, I'm afraid, since I've been on the air, I haven't looked at my sort of sources, so I cannot say it, but it wasn't there an hour ago. But I mean, they'll have to open it at some stage, but we shouldn't jump to joy at that. As I already mentioned, it will be opening under a new rules and regulations in which Israel will now determine and dictate how many Muslims will be able to go in, what time they can go in, and how many of the settlers will be allowed in as well and pray. And they're talking about sharing the place. So, the fact that they've been able to close it and open it at their dictate is a sign of danger, and we should not accept that. And it's not a sign of celebration. It is actually, we should continue with our campaign to say that Israel should have no right in the very first place to close it. And who are they to tell us that we're going to open it for you, as if they're doing us a favor? They're not doing us a favor. They're occupying one of the most blessed side of Muslims in Jerusalem. And then they want to sort of gain gravy points, as it were, by saying, look, we're opening it for you. I mean, how can the occupier tell the oppressed, and I'm doing you a favor? They should end the occupation itself.
Samuel, please go ahead.
I just want to echo what Dr. Ismail said. Israel should not have any sovereignty and decision-making when it comes to the holy sites in the Old City, whether it be Al-Aqsa and the Church of Resurrection. And I just want to point out another instance where there was a trap where people rejoiced for the wrong reason, is that the incident where the Latin patriarch and his colleague were they were disallowed to go into the Church of Resurrection for Palm Sunday, and then later there was an apology by the Israeli police and by Benjamin Netanyahu, and then later there was granted access, and then people were relieved and thought it was an achievement. That isn't an achievement. They do not have the authority, they do not have the sovereignty to decide who goes in and what goes in, and we should not be celebrating for some access that we get to the holy sites that the Israeli government gives us. We need to be strong in our demands that they do not have any sovereignty and decision-making to those sites. I think we need to be clear, and I don't think we need to be obsessing on whether the Israelis give us access for 1 hour, 2 hours, or the whole day. They shouldn't even be a part of the conversation.
Thank you for that. Maulana, final thoughts?
Just to elaborate on some of those points that Dr. Ismail and Samuel have mentioned. Dr. Ismail earlier mentioned the court, the application to the court from settler groups to allow them to spend the special period within Masjid al-Aqsa. One of the rationales offered by the court for rejecting their application, which Dr. correctly mentioned we should not celebrate, was that the settlers do not have a secure space within Masjid al-Aqsa to be able to carry out their rituals. In itself, there's a great danger, there's a great red alert there, so as to suggest that if there was a secure space for settlers within Masjid al-Aqsa to be able to carry out their rituals, then the court would have permitted their entry into Masjid al-Aqsa. So the current focus from the Israelis, there needs to be a lot of pressure on the Israelis based on their own rationale to say that you closed al-Aqsa on the supposed security pretext, which we know is total hogwash. Those who are dripping with blood coming out from the genocide of Gaza, cannot be seen in any way as protectors of human life, or more so of Palestinian life in Jerusalem. But that was your pretext for closing Masjid al-Aqsa. Now that there is a ceasefire, why are you delaying? So it's going to be the modus operandi of the Israelis to delay as much as possible the opening of Masjid al-Aqsa. When they do not have any other choice, then they may potentially open up Masjid al-Aqsa. But as experts such as Dr. Abdullah Ma'ruf, etc., have pointed out, and Dr. Ismail Patel just mentioned a moment ago, this should not be celebrated, as the Israelis would use every opportunity to reset or tweak the status quo after Al-Aqsa is open. They did this after the 2025 aggression with Iran, and after that particular aggression, they pushed the ticket further in terms of what settlers can do at Masjid al-Aqsa. And here the big word that we're seeing being toyed about is equality. When this masjid is going to be opened, it's going to potentially be open for settlers and Muslims at exactly the same time, perhaps allocating separate spaces, perhaps allocating similar times and numbers for both of these religious groups to enter, which we totally reject. But the broader flavor of our conversation this evening is that this is a moment, as we appeal to the states, to put everything on the table. Everybody has seen the harms of a piecemeal approach. I only protect my sovereign interests, and as a result of that, the Israelis separate the fronts and are able to continue the war, continue the aggression in another area. Whereas if we unite the efforts and look at what is happening in Iran, not separate from what the genocide in Gaza, not separate from the annexation in the West Bank, not separate from what is happening in Lebanon, not separate from the Holy Sepulchre, not separate from Masjid al-Aqsa, then we are basically seeing the potential of this moment to be able to bring all the unresolved issues of injustice on the table. And therefore, echoing what Samuel had said, we do not just stop about access to Aqsa and don't celebrate a false sense of victory if Al-Aqsa is open for us. We need to ask, why were there Israeli guards at Al-Aqsa in the first place? Why is East Jerusalem occupied? Why is Itamar Ben-Gvir and the Israeli occupation police chief making the decisions for East Jerusalem? Why are there settlements in East Jerusalem? All of these questions need to be part of our advocacy for Masjid al-Aqsa. And I'd also appeal to those who we always appeal to when you visit Masjid al-Aqsa, when you come for religious pilgrimages to the holy sites, to not only think about your personal comfort, as has often been the case. If I have a spiritually fulfilling experience, that's all that matters. And the experiences of Palestinians being cut off from these sites are whitewashed. It's time for much more ethical tours to this land that takes all these factors into consideration.
Absolutely. Well, unfortunately, time is of the essence, and we have run out of time. Maulana Ibrahim Musa, Dr. Ismail Patel, and Samuel Munir, we thank you. We say Jazakallah to all of you for your time with us right here on Salam Media this evening. All the best. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Alaikum salam.
Thank you very much.
Well, that brings us to the end of tonight's edition of In Conversation with myself, Inayat Wali, and once again, inspired by the discussions we've had on both our broadcasts this evening. Remember, the podcasts are available. In fact, you can continue if you have missed part of the show as well. It is up on our YouTube channel. It is on our Facebook as well. And I'm sure there will be a number of clips that you will be able to watch once the technical team clips obviously looks at the videos and some of the important messaging that has come out of tonight's broadcast. And with that, I'm taking leave of you. Once again, it's been an absolute pleasure for myself and the team here at Salam Media. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.